France didn't collapse in 1940 because its army was weak or because its people lacked courage. It collapsed because it walked into the Second World War expecting a repeat of the First, while Germany had reinvented the entire concept of modern conflict. And once the mistake became clear, it was already too late. The story of France's rapid fall isn't a tale of cowardice. It's a story about outdated assumptions, slow decision-making, and a nation still recovering from trauma. When the German attack came, it attacked not only France's borders, but France's confidence in its own future. And from the moment the breakthrough happened, everything France believed about how wars were fought suddenly fell apart. For 20 years, France had prepared for a defensive struggle. The memory of the previous war was carved into the nation's collective mind. Entire towns had been wiped out in the First World War. Families had lost sons, fathers and brothers at a scale the country could barely process. More than 1 million French soldiers never came home. So naturally, French planners designed their strategy around preventing that trauma from happening again. They built the Maginot Line, a reinforced chain of fortifications, bunkers and underground railways along the German border. For them, it wasn't just a military project, it was a psychological shield. It told the French public, this time we are ready, this time they will not break through. But the Maginot Line reflected the wrong problem. It answered the question of how to stop another 1914. Meanwhile, Germany had no intention of repeating 1914. German commanders were studying speed, mobility, and shock. They were drilling their armored divisions like they were one living being. They were training pilots to coordinate with tank units in real time. They were placing radios in nearly every armored vehicle so that frontline officers could adapt instantly. In other words, the Germans were preparing for the next war. The French were preparing for the last one. French generals believed that the Ardennes forest, stretching between Luxembourg and northern France, was too dense, too rugged, and too narrow for tanks to move quickly. It would be, they insisted, a natural shield. But to German strategists, that assumption was an opening. They wanted the Allies to concentrate their strongest forces in Belgium. They wanted the illusion of a repeat from the First World War. And so, while French and British units marched north expecting the main clash there, German armoured divisions slipped into the Ardennes, what the French called impassable. The Germans crossed in just a couple of days. The moment German armour emerged from the forest and raced toward the River Meuse, France's entire plan shattered. French units rushed to respond, but everything about their system was slow. Orders had to move through layers of bureaucracy. Tank units were scattered instead of concentrated, and French communication relied on outdated methods, field phones, messengers, and rigid procedures. Meanwhile, German armoured units advanced like a spearhead, moving with constant initiative. The French weren't defeated by lack of bravery. They were overwhelmed by a tempo of movement they had never imagined. When German advances reached the Meuse River, French commanders still couldn't believe the reports. How could so many tanks appear in such difficult terrain? How could they be moving so fast? France had more tanks, and many of them were better armoured, but German tanks were coordinated. They advanced in clusters, supported by fast aircraft strikes that targeted bridges, roads and command posts. French tanks, by contrast, were spread out across different units and used mainly to support infantry, not to break through enemy lines. The difference in doctrine was enormous. The Germans weren't just moving, they were disrupting. Every hour, French command centres were losing contact with entire sections of the front. Once the Germans broke through at Sedan, they didn't pause. They drove straight toward the English Channel, slicing the Allied armies in half. What was supposed to be a long defensive war transformed into a race against time. British and French soldiers found themselves trapped in a giant pocket, cut off from reinforcement. The encirclement happened so quickly that many French officers couldn't even comprehend the scale of the disaster until German tanks were already behind them. In just a few days, the strategic position of the Allies collapsed. This was the military disaster, but the psychological disaster was just as damaging. For French soldiers on the ground, the speed of the collapse felt unreal. One moment, they were told, Germany couldn't possibly be advancing through the Ardennes. The next moment, they were being told German vehicles were already crossing the Meuse. Rumors spread faster than orders. Panic spread through units that had barely fired a shot. Entire divisions found themselves outflanked before they even understood what direction the fight was coming from. When the Germans cut communications, the French command structure became a maze of confusion. Without clear information, units made decisions based on fear rather than strategy. Back in Paris, the government was fracturing. Politicians argued about whether to continue fighting, move the government to North Africa, or negotiate. The leadership crisis filtered down to soldiers and civilians. How do you fight with confidence when your own leaders disagree on whether the fight should continue at all? The mood inside France shifted from determination to dread. Streets filled with civilians fleeing the front, highways clogged with cars, wagons, bicycles, and families carrying whatever belongings they could. This slowed French reinforcements even more. Every army movement was blocked by civilians trying to escape. The collapse of infrastructure became part of the military collapse itself. When the British evacuated at Dunkirk, they saved hundreds of thousands of men, but they also left behind huge amounts of equipment. France didn't blame Britain. Any nation in that situation would have done the same, but it left France facing Germany alone, with half its northern force effectively removed from the fight. French morale, already shaken, now felt the weight of isolation. The German advance didn't slow. It pushed deeper, capturing key crossroads and towns faster than French planners could reposition their units. The French military was still capable of pockets of resistance, but the Germans were playing a different game. Every time France tried to stabilize a line, German forces simply outflanked it again. The psychological numbness intensified when French civilians realized German forces were approaching Paris. The city had been the heart of France for centuries. Losing it wasn't just a military problem, it was a symbolic blow. The government fled south. The population braced for occupation. By the time Paris was entered, France had lost its political center, its communication networks, and its ability to coordinate national defense. The country wasn't out of courage, it was out of structure. The French army fought on, and in many places fought fiercely, but once the German breakthrough split the Allied armies, a comeback became almost impossible. France had entered the war thinking it would fight in trenches. Instead, it faced a form of warfare designed to crush slow-moving armies before they could adjust. The old rules no longer applied. The Maginot Line, once seen as France's pride, became a symbol of the nation's miscalculation. It had been built to stop a German attack that never came. The real attack went around it, through the very place French commanders insisted Germany couldn't go. Inside Germany, the morale situation was the opposite. German soldiers were energized by a combination of confidence and momentum. Every victory worked like fuel. Each breakthrough boosted their belief in the new strategy. They weren't just advancing. They believed they were proving that their new doctrine worked. This created a feedback loop where success produced even more speed. And the faster they moved, the less time they gave France to react. Blitzkrieg wasn't just a tactical method, it was psychological dominance. In the weeks after the Ardennes breakthrough, France found itself trying to fight a three-dimensional war with a one-dimensional mindset. Their systems relied on order, predictability, and defensive lines. Germany attacked those systems with chaos, movement, and unpredictability. Every French advantage, better armor, more men, strong fortifications, was neutralized by the fact that they were always reacting, never initiating. And every day that passed, French civilians grew more exhausted and fearful. Their country was being sliced apart faster than they could comprehend. The French leadership attempted to reorganize. Generals tried to launch counterattacks. Some were successful at first, catching German units by surprise. But every counterattack ran into the same problem. German armored groups could detect, reposition, and counterattack faster. The French were trying to hit a moving target that rarely stayed still, long enough to take a clean blow. German commanders weren't just using tanks, they were using timing. Every attack was designed to strike before France could form a solid line. And each time a French counterattack failed, morale dipped again. In the end, the fall of France wasn't about bravery, it was about pace. Germany fought at a tempo France couldn't match. They rewrote the rules of engagement, and France didn't rewrite its own rules in time. The defeat at Sedan wasn't just a military setback, it was the moment France realized that everything it had prepared for didn't matter. By the time the government accepted this, Germany was already inside the country, carving through its remaining defenses. When France finally stopped fighting, it wasn't because the nation lacked will, it was because the strategic situation was hopeless. The country had been sliced in half, key cities had fallen, communication networks were shattered, civilians were exhausted, and the psychological blow of losing Paris was too heavy to recover from. France needed time to reorganize, but Germany never gave them that time. The speed of the collapse created the collapse. The psychological shock accelerated the military failure, yet even in defeat, the French spirit didn't disappear. French forces continued fighting overseas. The resistance would rise, and France would eventually stand with the Allies in victory. But in 1940, the nation was caught between two eras, the world of slow, methodical warfare they remembered, and the new world of mechanized speed they could not yet master. And in that gap, Germany delivered the blow that brought France to its knees. Because in 1940, France didn't crumble. France was overtaken by a war that moved faster than anything the world had ever seen.